We all know there's been a lot of talk about child intimate searches being conducted unlawfully by the police. I say police rather than the Met, because if this goes on in the Met, it's bound to be happening elsewhere. It's just that everybody's focus is on the Met right now. In fact, within the Met alone, there's said to have been more than 600 children who have been subjected to forced strip searches over a 2-year period between 2018 and 2020, apparently with black boys being disproportionately targeted. So between 2018 and 2020, around 650 children aged between 10 and 17 were searched. Of these, 58% were described by police as being black, and more than 95% were boys. I mean, 58%, let's be honest, isn't majorly in the realms of disproportionate, is it? Let's be honest. And this unfortunately brings me back to my conclusion, not one that's agreed by all, by any means, but perhaps children from minority communities are the ones who are committing more of a specific type of crime, which could lead them to concealing items or substances on their person. Now, I'm certainly not condoning the strip searches that are against the procedure as laid out in the Police and Criminal Evidence Act. But we do know that the majority of certain offences are carried out by those of particular characteristics, which could then lead to them interacting with the police more and leading to more searches. The fact that these figures state that more than 95% are boys would also indicate that it's not necessarily a racial thing. Otherwise, just as many girls would be getting subjected to it as well. And we know that boys are more likely to be involved in crime than women. So it kind of makes sense. Also, what interests me is that all of these strip searches have been carried out, but only now are they being called racist. And only since child Q, a girl, was strip searched, which gave the perfect opportunity to bring up all black children strip searched and call them all racist. Certainly not for a moment suggested that some wouldn't have been done simply because the child was black, because unfortunately that's the world we live in, although I don't condone it. But where was the outcry in 2018, 2019, 2020 and 2021 when these 650 plus incidents are said to have happened? If they thought it was due to their race at the time, they would have made a fuss over it, but didn't. And to me, personally, that's very telling. Currently, 4 police constables are under investigation for the child Q search, which, although I can't say was racist or not, was certainly completely against procedures as laid out in the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, and let's not forget, was completely immoral of them to do. Scotland Yard has of course apologised and said it should never have happened, no doubt in the hope that it'll soon get forgotten about. In almost 1/4 of the 650 cases, the strip searches took place without an appropriate adult present, which of course is in the Police and Criminal Evidence Act and therefore required by law, unless it is a case of an emergency. 53% of those strip searched resulted in no further action, which the Children's Commissioner said indicates they may well not have been justified or necessary in all cases. Children's Commissioner Dame Rachel de Souza said she was deeply shocked by the figures, which show that a significant number of children are being subjected to this intrusive and traumatising practice each year. She is also extremely concerned at the ethnic disproportionality that they reveal. She said, "I'm not reassured that what happened to child Q was an isolated issue, but instead believe it may be a particular concerning example of a more systemic problem around child protection within the Metropolitan Police. I remain unconvinced that the Metropolitan Police is consistently considering children's welfare and well-being." Now, with so much attention on this issue, charities have stepped in to condemn the number of children who have been subjected to these searches without an appropriate adult present. Iryna Pona of the Children's Society said, "We are horrified by the number of children subjected to these searches, and it is shocking that nearly 1/4 took place without an appropriate adult present. Strip searches are intrusive and traumatic, and children are being completely failed if even basic safeguards are not in place. They said they were concerned by the overrepresentation of black children in these strip search figures, which only adds to the fears prompted by race and children being treated as adults being identified as issues in the child Q case. Iryna Pona said, sadly, we often support children who have been groomed and coerced into crimes like county lines gang, drug dealing, only to be treated as adults who have made a willful decision rather than offered support as victims of exploitation. Now, to be fair, even if a child has been exploited or coerced into committing an offence, they may still have committed an offence and be in possession of something illegal or dangerous, which would still mean they would need to be searched. Of course, not in the manner that we're hearing about, but rather in line with the Code of Ethics and the Police and Criminal Evidence Act. But we cannot simply not search people because they may have been exploited or coerced. It simply needs to be taken into account in the way that they are dealt with. But as I say, it cannot mean that a search of any kind is not carried out. Dr. Halima Begum, Runnymede Trust Chief Executive, said, "It just underlines how badly our children are being failed by the state institutions there to protect them. Such traumatic encounters with the police where children are criminalised or treated as adults would have an unforgivable impact on their psychological well-being." She said, "These experiences form the main lens through which children view the police, and often their teachers too, when these searches happen at school. It's the start of the breakdown of trust in the people and institutions supposedly there to protect them and keep them safe." A spokesman for London Mayor Sadiq Khan said it is deeply concerning that there are so many cases of children being strip searched by the Met without an appropriate adult present, and there remain serious wider issues to with regards to disproportionality and the use of stop and search on young black boys. This must change, and Sadiq has been absolutely clear with the incoming Metropolitan Police Commissioner about the scale of improvement needed across the force so that every Londoner can feel both protected and served. He has also already asked the Met to conduct a review of all strip searches of children to ensure lessons are learnt, and is committed to holding them to account on the improvements needed. Well, Sadiq, let's face facts. You pushed Cressida Dick out for her failings. Well, the vast majority of her failings weren't actually her failings, they were the failings of people she was in charge of, but as she was in charge of them, the buck stopped with her. But you, Sadiq, you're in charge of the Met as the Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime, or MOPAC. Under the Police Reform and Social Responsibility Act 2011, police and crime commissioners were established for each police force in England and Wales, except for the Metropolitan Police, whose responsibility lies with Sadiq Khan, making Sadiq Khan responsible for the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, meaning that all of the failings of the Met, whose buck stopped with the Met Commissioner, also means that all of the failings of the Met Commissioner must stop with Sadiq Khan. Therefore, you clearly need to go too. Now, whether a person is black or white, old or young, if they are suspected of a crime, I mean genuinely suspected, not just because the TSG are bored and want somebody to abuse, they must be dealt with. But just as we must follow laws, the police must follow laws too in these situations as laid out in the Police and Criminal Evidence Act. The problem is, whereas we would get convicted for breaking the law, the police do not, and so continue to do so with almost impunity. Now, of course, there are racist people in the police, just as there are homophobic police and misogynistic police. And funnily enough, the same goes for normal members of society. But ask yourself why racism wasn't brought up in 2018, 2019, 2020 and 2021 over these searches. Ask yourself and research who is committing the offences in general, which would lead to a person of a certain characteristic being scrutinised more. I mean, if a child was abducted from a park and there were 3 men and 10 women, I guarantee the men would be tracked down and questioned first. Because unfortunately, it's men who commit the vast majority of those offences. Does that mean that men are a victim of misandry? Of course it doesn't. It's just that years of similar things happening with the majority of outcomes indicating one kind of suspect over another. I know you won't all agree with me, and that's fine. And that is why I add my opinions to the reports of the facts, so I can encourage discussion in the comments. So please do let me know what you think.